An unknown threat approaches. The watch station's sensors pulsed with warning lights. A proximity alert blared through the command center, the artificial intelligence overlay flashing a single chilling phrase. Warning caution, arriving human war vessel warning. High Overlord Zyvar of the Jilnari Dominion froze in place. The air in the control room felt suddenly thicker, heavier, as if reality itself had taken a sharp breath. What does that mean? Zyvar whispered. The technicians scrambled over their consoles, verifying, rechecking, recalibrating. Surely this was an error. Humanity? Here. Lord Zyvar, a trembling officer spoke up, their scales paling to a sickly gray. We have confirmed, it's real. Zyvar's tendrils tightened around the ceremonial blade at his waist. No, this wasn't possible. The Jilnari Dominion had subjugated entire species. Their fleets had burned civilizations to the ground. They had crushed resistance wherever it rose. But now, here, in their own territory, humanity had come knocking. And they had come alone. A single ship against an empire. Zyvar forced himself to speak. Give me visuals. A single image appeared on the holoscreen. The void stretched endless and black, perforated by the distant glow of dying stars. And in that void, silhouetted against the abyss, was one ship. Not a fleet. Not an armada. Just one ship. It was unlike anything Zyvar had ever seen. Its hull was a deep matte black as if it absorbed the very light around it. No markings. No identification codes. No energy signatures that he could recognize. Yet the moment he laid eyes upon it, he knew. This ship was not ordinary. This ship was death incarnate. The growing horror. How large is it? Zyvar demanded. One of the officers gulped. It is difficult to measure, my lord. The readings fluctuate. Fluctuate. Yes, the officer stammered. One moment it appears the size of a frigate. The next it seems larger than our dreadnoughts. And then, it simply vanishes. That was impossible. Ships did not change size. Ships did not vanish from sensors at will. Ships did not defy physics. Yet this one did. And it was coming closer. Humanity's message. Then without warning the station's main screen flickered and died. The usual displays of Dominion fleet positions, defensive protocols, and star charts vanished, replaced by one single transmission. The image of a human appeared. A woman, dressed in a high-collared black uniform, her eyes like frozen stars. This is Commander Vale of the UNSC Revenant, she said, her voice calm, precise, and unshaken. You are in violation of human space. Zyvar's blood ran cold. Violation of human space? That was impossible. This system belonged to the Jilnari Dominion for over 1,000 years. This territory belongs to us, Zyvar snapped. Humanity has no claim here. The human did not blink. This was once the home of the Arlani, she said. Zyvar scoffed. A dead species. The human's voice darkened. A species your kind wiped out. Zyvar's jaw tightened. The Arlani had been nothing. A primitive race. They had been weak. Their world had been ripe for conquest. But the way this human spoke, it was not a request. It was not an argument. It was a statement of intent. The realization hit Zyvar like a hammer. They weren't here for diplomacy. They were here for vengeance. The first shot is fired. Prepare our dreadnoughts, Zyvar snarled. If they want war, we shall. The command center shook violently. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. Zyvar's body slammed against the control panel as a sudden force unlike anything he had ever felt sent a tremor through the station. What was that? He roared. An officer gasped in horror. And my lord, they just disabled our planetary defenses. Zyvar's heart stopped. One shot. One ship. And they had already taken out the entire defense grid. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. The Revenant advances. The holoscreen flickered again. The human woman, Commander Vale, was still there. Her expression had not changed. You are given one chance, she said. Withdraw your forces from this sector. Immediately. Zyvar's claws dug into his palms. He had spent centuries building this empire. He had raised worlds, slaughtered billions. And now, this human wanted him to surrender everything? Never, he growled. Commander Vale tilted her head. Her voice barely changed, but in it, Zyvar heard something chilling. Then you'll understand what happens next. The transmission cut off. And the ship began to move. It was so slow. So deliberate. Not in a hurry. Not desperate. Like a predator that already knew the hunt was over. Zyvar's breath hitched. They had made a mistake. They had invited death into their home. The final warning. The Revenant entered the planet's orbit. No weapons fired. No armies descended. It didn't need them. Because everyone already knew. This wasn't just a ship. It was humanity's judgment made manifest. A ship that could erase empires with a single strike. A ship that could break the very concept of war itself. And it had come for them. Zyver's mind screamed for an answer. Oh, what? Humanity was supposed to be weaker than them. But this was something else. This was the end. The silence before the storm. The UNSC Revenant loomed in orbit over the Jilnari stronghold world, unmoving, its black hull seemingly drinking in the light of the stars. It did nothing. And yet it did everything. The dreadnoughts of the Jilnari Dominion remained frozen, their weapons powered but undirected, their officers paralyzed by uncertainty. Because they had all seen what it did. One shot. Just one. And their planetary defense grid had collapsed like it never existed. High Overlord Zyvar stood in the shattered remnants of his command center, his tendrils twitching, his second heart pounding a desperate rhythm against his ribs. The holoscreens around him displayed flickering, fractured feeds of their military forces scrambling for a response. But what could they do? This was one ship against an empire. And yet, it had made their entire war machine look like an anthill before a hurricane. The Revenant had not fired again. It did not need to. Its silence was the loudest weapon of all. A false sense of confidence. "My lord," a bridge officer gasped, his voice trembling. The Revenant has not engaged any further. It remains in geosynchronous orbit. Zyver's breathing steadied. Slowly his terror cooled, or rather he forced it into submission. It was just a ship. It could not take on an entire armada alone. Surely they had been intimidated by our numbers, he told himself. Then now is our chance, Zyver growled. Send our fleets in. Surround it. Crush it. I want that ship turned to ash. The trap closes. Within minutes, the Jilnari armada converged on the Revenant. Hundreds of warships. Thousands of weapon systems locked and primed. It was an unstoppable wall of firepower, encircling the lone human ship from all sides. The Revenant remained motionless. Zyver's mandibles curled into a sneer. They were arrogant, he spat. They thought their little trick would make us cower. But they didn't expect us to strike back. He stood tall, his taloned fingers tightening into a fist of victory. Fire. And then, nothing. Every ship in the Jilnari armada unleashed their full firepower. Hundreds of plasma lances, antimatter torpedoes, ion bursts. The darkness of space was lit aflame with the sheer force of their colossal onslaught. A storm of devastation rushed toward the Revenant, enough to vaporize entire continents. And then, nothing. The weapons vanished. Not detonated. Not intercepted. Gone. Like they had never existed. The impossible defense. Zyvar stared in disbelief. What happened? He barked. No one had an answer. No damage detected, a bridge officer whispered. Our weapons simply disappeared. Zyver's mind raced. Shielding? Cloaking? Countermeasures? No known technology could erase firepower on that scale. But the Revenant did. The ship shifted. A subtle movement. Not fleeing. Not retreating. It was aligning itself. And Zyver's gut twisted in horror. They hadn't survived out of luck. They had allowed the Jilnari to fire first. This whole time they had been testing them. Measuring. Calculating. Like a predator gauging the weight of its prey. And now, it was done waiting. The Revenant fires back. The UNSC Revenant unleashed a single pulse of energy. It was not a laser. It was not a missile. It was not anything the Jilnari had ever encountered before. It was something more. Something old. Something primal. Something designed for absolute annihilation. The pulse spread out in a perfect sphere, moving too fast to dodge. Zyver's sensors screamed warnings, but it was already too late. The pulse touched the first wave of ships. And they ceased to exist. No explosion. No debris. Just nothing. The pulse ripped through the entire fleet. One moment the Jilnari armada was there. The next it was gone. Vanished. Like a memory erased from existence. And the Revenant was still there. Unscathed. Unchallenged. Unstoppable. Zyver's blood turned to ice. This wasn't war. This wasn't even a battle. This was extermination. The ultimate horror. A transmission flashed onto Zyver's screen. Commander Vale's face reappeared. Her expression was the same. Cold. Calm. Unmoved. You were given a chance to leave. Her voice was devoid of emotion. She tilted her head slightly as if considering something unimportant. Then she spoke the words that sealed the fate of an empire. "Now we're done talking." The screen cut to black. The fall of the Gilnari Armada. Zyver's mind refused to process what had just happened. The Gilnari Armada, his armada, had been there just moments ago. Hundreds of warships. Thousands of weapons. An empire's pride and power. And in the space of a single heartbeat they were gone. Not destroyed. Not wreckage drifting in the void. Gone. Like they had never existed. Panic sets in. Zyver's talons dug into the command console as his officers descended into chaos around him. Sea contact lost with all forward battalions. There's no debris. No survivors. No readings, there's nothing left. Zyver tried to speak, but his mouth had gone dry. They hadn't just lost the battle. They had lost the ability to fight at all. Because how do you fight an enemy that can erase entire fleets with a whisper? The Revenant moves. The UNSC Revenant was no longer idle. It descended, slowly, deliberately, towards the planet. Zyver felt something he had not felt since he was a child. A primal ancient terror. Not just for himself, not just for his soldiers, but for his entire world. "Pull back our remaining forces," he bellowed. "Get every available ship into orbit now." The few remaining Gilnari vessels scrambled, breaking formation, fleeing toward the Revenant in a desperate bid to intercept. But they were too slow. The human warship did not dodge. It did not shield itself. It did not fire. It let them come. And then, it simply passed through them. The pursuing warships blinked out of existence the moment they came close. One moment there, the next erased. And the Revenant continued on. Unchallenged. Unstoppable. The planet trembles. On the surface of Gilnari Prime, millions looked to the sky. The Revenant was visible from the ground now, a black shape that drank in the light, casting unnatural shadows across the capital. For the first time in their history, the Gilnari people saw their gods fail them. The sky itself felt heavier. The air hummed with an unseen force. Then, the voice came. The message. The Revenant's voice did not come through screens or comm channels. It came everywhere. In every Gilnari mind. It was not words. It was an understanding. A presence that pushed into their very souls, bypassing language, bypassing thought. They all understood at the same time. There is no surrender. There is no escape. Your war is over. Zyver fell to his knees, clutching his head. The entire planet screamed. The final act. Then the UNSC Revenant stopped. Right above the capital. For a moment, Zyver dared to hope. Maybe it would leave. Maybe the humans would let them live. Maybe. And then the ship opened its maw. A glimpse into the abyss. A singularity began to form beneath the Revenant. Not fire. Not energy. Not radiation. Something else. Something worse. A perfect sphere of nothingness. It expanded outward, slowly at first. Buildings, people, vehicles, all of it dissolved into the void. And it kept growing. It did not burn. It did not explode. It simply removed. Zyver's last moments. Zyver could only watch as his empire ceased to exist. His city, his people, unmade before his very eyes. The void swallowed the skyline. The towers. The streets. His soldiers. His palace. And finally, him. Silence. When the Revenant finally left orbit, Gilnari Prime no longer existed. It had not been bombed. It had not been ravaged. It had simply been removed. The UNSC Revenant drifted into the black once more. Silent. Unstoppable. Unopposed. What remained of the Gilnari Empire? There was nothing left. Gilnari Prime, gone. The Grand Gilnari Armada, erased. The Gilnari High Council, unmade. The UNSC Revenant had not conquered the Gilnari. It had deleted them. No wreckage. No survivors. No history. The great empire that once spanned hundreds of systems now existed only in fading memories. And soon even those would be gone. Echoes of horror. Across the galaxy, those who had once feared the Gilnari now trembled at the specter of their destroyer. Worlds that had cowered before the Gilnari's war machine now sent out desperate transmissions. "We are not enemies of humanity. We do not oppose you. Please, we surrender." But the UNSC Revenant never responded. It simply drifted. Moving through the void one system at a time. Never rushing. Never stopping. Watching. Waiting. The Council's desperation. The Galactic Council, the governing body of thousands of species, convened in panic. The chamber was chaos. We cannot allow this to continue. The humans have broken every law of war. They didn't fight a war. They ended it. We must appeal to them. Beg if necessary. It was a humiliating moment for the Council. Beings who once dictated the fate of entire civilizations now reduced to pleading for mercy. And yet, no one dared suggest retribution. Because how do you punish an enemy you cannot fight? How do you threaten something that can erase entire fleets in an instant? You don't. You submit. A solemn transmission. With no other option, the Council's Supreme Chancellor stood before the galaxy's cameras. She took a deep breath and spoke. To the people of Earth, to the commanders of the UNSC, to the crew of the Revenant, we recognize your power. We acknowledge our mistakes. We accept our fate. Please, we only ask one thing. Let us exist. Then she waited. The galaxy waited. Would the Revenant listen? Or would they be next? The Revenant decides. For 6 days the galaxy held its breath. The UNSC Revenant did not answer. It simply hovered at the edge of known space as if listening, as if considering. Then on the 7th day it moved. Not towards the Council. Not towards another empire. But into the void. Beyond the borders of the known galaxy. It had made its decision. For now. What comes next? The war was over before it began. The humans had not demanded territory. They had not asked for resources. They had not even issued terms. They had simply acted. And with a single warship they had rewritten galactic history. No species would ever challenge them again. No empire would risk defying them. The UNSC had no need for war. Because war required an opponent. And the humans had none left. The last question. As the galaxy tried to recover from the trauma of what it had witnessed, only one question remained. Had the Revenant left because it was satisfied? Or had it simply found a greater target? The stars held no answer. Only silence. And in that silence, a dreadful thought settled into the minds of every species. One day, the Revenant may return. And when it did, what would it erase next? Do you want to see what happens when the Revenant returns? Subscribe now because next time there might be no one left to tell the story.